The backfire effect is a lie. This rocked my world over the weekend. I want to share it with you guys. Maybe you're familiar with the backfire effect, maybe you're not. We'll explain what it is. It's been around for 7, 8, 9 years, and it's been sort of a pop psychology phenomenon, I would argue, right? It's something a lot of people in the general public have heard of, and it all ties back to one or a few studies. It turns out since that study, many more studies have been done trying to replicate it, and those suggest the backfire effect does not actually exist, and that you can convince people with facts. You just have to repeat the facts over and over again. It all comes back to a paper in 2010, and this paper argued that when people with somewhat entrenched views are presented with data and facts from a counter argument, these people get further entrenched, right? And this became a bit of a sort of pop psychology phenomenon. There are many YouTube videos about it. And I would say from like 2015 to 2018, it really became quite popular to promote, to use throughout the general public and in science. And, admittedly myself, I often use this when, answering people that come on stream and say, how do I talk to somebody like an anti-vaxxer or a climate change denier that is really, really entrenched and stubborn? And I would often reference this study, right? That, you should not be using data and facts, but instead you should be finding common ground and asking them what their morals and ethics are and trying to connect with them on some other level, right, than strictly bringing all the scientific consensus and data to them, right? Because when you do that, you actually have them further entrenched in their views. And this was all based back to this 2010 paper. Many studies have come out since then, right, that have done much larger comprehensive studies and found that the backfire effect in that context does not exist, right? It may exist in this one example of, invading Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, but in all these other trials, they did not, through their rigorous statistical analysis of many, many people and clinical studies in sociology and psychology, there is no evidence of this effect of people getting further entrenched when presented with data and facts to try to convince them. And so all of this hype about the backfire effect and all the things I've been really promoting, for lack of a better word, is actually based on what appears to be faulty science. And this is what happens with science, right? It's an iterative process of improvement over time. And so you're going to have these instances. And so I want to dig into the peer-reviewed literature that suggests the backfire effect is not what we thought it was. And it's not necessarily a binary yes or no, it exists or it doesn't. But the takeaway here is that you should use data and figures, right? And scientific consensus, even when discussing these subjects with people that are pretty entrenched. And the number one way to win somebody over or convince them to come over to your side, there is no shortcut. It takes a lot of time and it takes repetition of the data, right? That's why things like mask wearing should have been something that was mandated and at minimum repeated every single day at press briefings, right? Because people need to hear this every single day, and after a while, they will start to come over to that side and join them. We're going to go over and dig into this article, right, that really kickstarted the existence of the backfire effect in pop culture. An extensive literature addresses citizen ignorance. Very little research focuses on misconceptions. Can false or unsubstantiated beliefs about politics be corrected? Right? Who can relate? Who can relate right now? Can false or unsubstantiated beliefs about politics be corrected? Previous studies have not tested the efficacy of corrections in a realistic format. We conduct 4 experiments in which subjects read mock news articles. Results indicate that corrections frequently fail to reduce misconceptions among the targeted ideological group. We also document several instances of a backfire effect. in which corrections actually increase misperceptions among the group in question, right? So this was the sentence that then got propagated into the backfire effect in terms of the public. And here's a nice quote, right? If you want something to be like digestible for the general public, well, don't just like litter them with an abstract and scientific detail, but give them a quote from a beloved American like Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Most citizens appear to lack factual knowledge about political matters. Yikes. That's scary in an upcoming election. This deficit affects the issue opinions that they express. That seems legitimate. Citizens can successfully use heuristics or information about shortcuts as a substitute for detailed factual information in some circumstances. There's a distinction between being uninformed and being misinformed. Advocates typically assume that voters know they are uninformed and respond accordingly. Many citizens base their policy preferences on false, misleading, or unsubstantiated information that they believe to be true. Frequently, such misinformation is related to one's political preferences. For instance, after the US invasion of Iraq, the belief that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction before the invasion was closely associated with support for President Bush. And we've seen this time and time again when you take surveys on people's beliefs, and as part of that survey, they declared Democrat or Republican, and then you can lump, 80% of, Democrats believe X, while only 30% of Republicans believe X. So this is done all the time. It's especially important to determine whether misperceptions, which distort public opinion, can be corrected. In this paper, we report the results of 2 rounds of experiments investigating the extent to which corrective information embedded in realistic news reports succeeds in reducing prominent misconception about contemporary politics. This was conducted in 2005 and 2006. Notice the research isn't published until 2010. Science is slow. Everything we're trying to do right now with COVID-19 is like warp speed that we've never seen. And that's why you have to be really careful about things like hydroxychloroquine that look promising until you scale them up and do more harm than good. In several cases, we find that corrections actually strengthened misconceptions among the most strongly committed subjects. So this is the backfire effect, right? Trying to correct misinformation and misperceptions makes those people more strongly committed to those misperceptions. We conducted 4 experiments in which subjects read mock newspaper articles containing a statement from a political figure that reinforces a widespread misperception. They were randomly assigned to read the articles that either included or did not include corrective information immediately after that false statement. Okay, so that's the setup here, right? So you read through something, right? You're a Republican, right? You read through something and Trump has a statement furthering that misperception, okay? Right after that, you get corrective information immediately after it. Or you don't. That's the sort of controlled study they're doing here. All right, so here's the first study. Tested the effect of a correction embedded in a news report on beliefs that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction immediately before the US invasion. One of the primary rationales for the war offered by the Bush administration was Iraq's alleged possession of biological and chemical weapons. Many Americans failed to accept or did not find out that WMDs were never found inside the country. This misperception, which persisted long after the evidence against it had become overwhelming, was closely linked to support for Bush. One possible explanation for the prevalence of the WMD misperception is that journalists failed to adequately fact-check the administration's statements suggesting the US had found WMDs in Iraq. As such, we test a correction condition embedded in a mock news story, in which a statement that could be interpreted as suggesting Iraq did have WMD is followed by clarification that they had not been found. Okay, so 130 participants, right? The backfire effect is related to this one weapons of mass destruction test of 130 participants. Please briefly describe the emotions that the thought of your own death arouses in you. Ugh. They were then asked to read a mock news article that reports on a Bush campaign there was a risk that Saddam would pass weapons or materials or information to terrorist networks and in the world after September the 11th. That was a risk we could not afford to take. Such wording might suggest to listeners that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction. They followed this with a correction condition that discusses the release of the Dolfer report, which documents the lack of stockpiles. After reading, they were asked to state whether they agreed with the statement. Immediately before the U.S. invasion, Iraq had an active weapons of mass destruction program, the ability to produce these weapons, and large stockpiles, but Saddam was able to hide or destroy these weapons right before U.S. forces arrived. Okay, so you get 130 people, right? You get them to, half of them to read through this Bush statement that Saddam Hussein, a significant risk that he has WMDs, right? Half of your contingent gets corrective information afterwards, the other half does not. So let's try to interpret this table 1. The effect of the correction treatment. A centered 7-point ideology scale, so strongly liberal to strongly conservative. More knowledgeable subjects were less likely to agree that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Conservatives were more likely to agree with the statement. The correction treatment did not reduce overall misperceptions, and the mortality salience manipulation was statistically insignificant, whatever that means. The correction will be increasingly ineffective as subjects become more conservative. For very liberal subjects, the correction worked as expected, making them more likely to disagree with the statement that Iraq had WMD compared with control. So, liberals who kind of thought Iraq had weapons of mass destruction were convinced by the counter-arguments. That's for very liberal subjects. For those that describe them as just liberal, somewhat left of center, or centrist, these counter-arguments did not change their perception. But for those individuals who place themselves to the right of center ideologically, there's a statistically significant positive feedback. All right, so this is the money line right here. Okay. Script, welcome on in. The backfire effect is this, as described here. Conservatives who received a correction telling them Iraq did not have WMDs were more likely to believe Iraq had weapons of mass destruction after hearing information to the counter. So basically, you are either liberal, centrist, conservative, whatever you are, right? I present you with a quote from Bush that says, there's high risk that Saddam has WMDs, okay? You then hear counter information, right? And lots of data and tables that suggest, no, there's no evidence of WMDs, okay? Then I survey you at the end, what do you believe, right? And I survey you at the beginning, what do you believe, right? For liberals that thought there might be weapons of mass destruction, they were convinced by the counter argument, there's no evidence, there's no WMDs. For those that are very liberal, for those that are very conservative, right, that thought there are weapons of mass destruction, we need to invade Iraq. After I showed them all this evidence that suggests there is no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they become further convinced there actually is, that this is all fake news, and they're more convinced that there still are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. All right, so the backfire effect is that, presenting counter arguments to people further entrenches them in their views. And I think that's what this table is trying to show, right? There's some, whether this is statistically significant or not, right? So I guess very liberal, right, becomes less convinced of weapons of mass destruction, right? So this is a plot of the effect. So 0 is there's no change in attitude. If you're very liberal, there's a significant decrease, right, in your perception that there were WMDs after reading from technical experts that there are no WMDs, you're more convinced there are no WMDs. And that's significant, right? Outside the error bars. If you're somewhat liberal to a little liberal to centrist, right? To maybe even a little right of center, your opinion is not really swayed one way or the other, or we can't say that within statistical evidence, right? So this gray bar here, this confidence interval, right, is what's important. And this is why error bars are important, because you can't just look at the data point. You have to encapsulate the bias in your subjects, in yourself, in the study, and present a error bar, right? Which suggests, if something's outside the error bars, then it's, definitively as definitive as we can be. It's significant and we need to believe it. So all this stuff in the middle here, right, where the range is still within 0, means it's reasonable that there's no effect. Okay? It's only when you get to conservative people like this, and I present them with counter arguments, do they become further entrenched in their views. Responses to corrections in mock news articles differ significantly according to subjects' ideological views, right? Is somebody more open to having their misperceptions corrected? Well, it depends on their political and ideological views. Misperceptions actually get strengthened for, in this case, conservatives, when you try to convince them that they are following misinformation and disinformation, okay? And, this is the sentence here that, we've seen throughout this article that got propagated and defined as the backfire effect. The backfire effects that we found seem to provide further support for the growing literature showing that citizens engaged in motivated reasoning. All of our backfire results come from conservatives, finding that may provide support for the hypothesis that conservatives are especially dogmatic. Interesting. There's a great deal of evidence that liberals and Democrats also interpret factual information in ways that are consistent with their political predispositions. No argument there. Without conducting more studies, it is impossible to determine if liberals and conservatives react to corrections differently. The important point here is that this backfire effect and how it's used in the general public, right, is not actually found by other researchers. All right, so look at this. This is Thomas Wood from the Ohio State University and Ethan Porter from George Washington University. All right, this first paper was from, I don't know where they're from, Michigan and Georgia State. Can citizens heed factual information even when such information challenges their partisan ideological attachments? The backfire effect described by these guys, so this is the article we just went through, I just pasted in chat, says no. Rather than simply ignoring factual information, presenting respondents with facts can compound their ignorance. In their study, conservatives presented with factual information about absence of WMDs became more convinced weapons had actually been found. The present paper instead presents results from 4 experiments in which we enrolled 8,100 subjects. So these guys had 130, right? And I don't want to on these guys too bad. Right? I think they're rigorous. They studied 130 people for this one issue, and they found evidence of it. But taking that and meaning you can extrapolate it to all types of ideas and all types of ideologies is something that I think a lot of people have been doing, myself included, for many, many years, referencing this backfire effect without really reading the original literature. That's on me. When we enroll 8,100 subjects, not 130, and tested 36 issues, not one, across all experiments we found only one issue capable of triggering backfire. That issue? Whether WMDs were found in Iraq in 2003. This is how science works. We do something, we find something, right? Then other groups try to replicate it and expand upon it, right? This is what happens in my work. This is what happens in all science. So taking 130 people, expanding to 8,000, taking one issue, expanding to 36, 35 of those issues show no backfire effect, that it doesn't exist. One issue did. This exact issue that these people happened to investigate that originated the backfire effect. Even this WMD case was susceptible to a survey item effect. When presented with a less elaborate survey item, we found no WMD factual backfire. So I'm guessing they did a couple of different, it sounds like they did a couple of different variations of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Only for one type of question, right, in survey item, did they find a backfire effect when they did it like this paper did it. When they studied 35 other things, they didn't. Comparably elaborate items were incapable of instilling backfire in questions other than weapons of mass destruction. Evidence of factual backfire is far more tenuous than prior research suggests. By and large, citizens heed factual information, even when such information challenges their partisan and ideological commitments. Good news, everyone. This was the best thing I read all weekend, and I want it to be true. It does not fit with my worldview. My worldview is that citizens do not heed factual information, right? Which makes me not want to continue in science communication, because what's the point? This I want to believe in. I want to fit it in my worldview, but I'm struggling because my, general experience is that, maybe this is because we're biased towards the negative and those memories. But when I argue with, family members that are entrenched in certain arguments, I see them getting further entrenched, which seems like a backfire effect. And I think that's why this original research that suggested a backfire effect was easy to propagate into the media, into everybody's worldview. And they would use the backfire effect to argue how you should argue with citizens. Collectively, I think what I've learned, and hopefully what we're learning together here, is that for people that are incredibly entrenched, like conspiracy theories, this might be true. But by and large, citizens heed factual information. This is a win. This is incredible. This, gives me faith that the more scientists are in front of the media, perhaps into politics, like I am strongly pushing for and think we need more of, the more scientists get in the media, the more communication they do, the more they get into politics, the more they repeat the scientific consensus, the more citizens will actually heed this factual information, even when it challenges their partisan and ideological commitments. Let's get through some of the introduction to learn more about what they did, and then we'll dig into the other 35 issues. Can citizens affirm factual information about politics even when the facts cut against their ideological and partisan beliefs? Or are they destined to view the facts through a perceptual screen? Nyhan and Reifler 2010, that's the first paper we went over, offers strong evidence for the latter position. Subjects presented with facts correcting misperceptions responded by doubling down on their misperceptions. Particularly among conservatives, attempts to correct misconceptions activated a backfire effect against empirical facts, with subjects more strongly expressing a non-factual belief. All right, subsequent research has corroborated their initial finding. Republican subjects provide evidence of the scientific consensus on an anthropogenic climate change became more oppressed. Okay, so we should actually look at this. So in addition to this one WMD, a follow-up study by Hart and Nisbet in 2011 found that Republicans get further entrenched on the issue of anthropogenic climate change. What about vaccination? Providing evidence for the safety of common vaccines to parents already indisposed to vaccinate their children further reduce their willingness to vaccinate. All of this sounds like support of the backfire effect. Equally significant is the backfire effect's prominence in popular political accounts. Political elites habitually cite this research to explain the public's failure to heed facts consistent with the elite's policy proposal of the moment. Oof. Another line of research, however, draws a different, less worrisome conclusion. Despite the power of party and ideology, citizens are indeed capable of learning. I can learn. I can be taught. I am not some sort of robot. So we can all learn. At least I hope we can learn. Sometimes with encouragements and sometimes with small monetary incentives, citizens can absorb and retain complex new political information. Factual receptivity can take place despite partisan differences. All right, so building on the original Backfire effect, the present project maps the boundaries of the Backfire effect. What issues provoke resistance to factual information? Which groups and members of which parties are most likely to evince backfire? And which issues provoke which groups to backfire? These guys observed the backfire effect on 2 issues, WMDs and whether tax cuts increase tax receipts. They also found no backfire on stem cell research. Testing only 3 issues makes it difficult to determine if backfire is caused by ideological differences or if the results reflect the ideological importance issues being corrected. In other words, might liberals also prove factually maladaptive when presented with correction to the right issue? To address, we staged 4 separate studies comprised of more than 30 common misunderstood policy areas. Table 1 summarizes the issues. Okay, so taking not 1 issue or 3 issues like Nyhen and Reifler did, but taking 30 issues. Let's look at Table 1. What are the 30 issues we're talking about? Spiraling gun violence, drugs drive prison growth, hedge fund managers pay less, discrimination sole cause of gender wage gap, Obama cuts defense, Mexican immigrants disproportionately criminal, rising violence against police, taxes highest in the world, Obama passed TARP, Obama accommodates undocumented immigrants, spiraling teenage pregnancy rate, China holds most US debt, whites will soon be a racial minority, spiraling Chicago homicides, spiraling abortion rate, drone use, Chicago homicides, more of the same here. WMDs, real unemployment, EPA fracking, solar has more jobs than oil. Okay, so this is a more diverse set, but they still are sort of political ideology driven. The majority of issues have been purposely chosen to tap some of the most important ideological symbols along the political spectrum. For liberals, this means correcting their incumbent president, Obama, statement about the role of drug sentencing in growing incarcerated population. So I guess that was not right. Contradicting their party's presumptive presidential nominees' claim about the incidence of gun violence. For conservatives, we contradict their nominees' claim about undocumented immigrants and provide corrections about the incidence of abortion and teen pregnancy. If any correction should prompt a respondent to counter-argue unwelcome facts, these issues stand out as likely candidates. 8,100 subjects, 36 issues. We observed almost no evidence of a backfire effect, right? When people are presented information counter to their rigorously held misconception belief, they do not get further entrenched in that belief. They might not be won over to your side, but they're not getting further entrenched, which is the whole notion of the backfire effect. One significant instance of backfire, and even that instance was ameliorated by simplifying the survey item. When presented with facts that correct political leaders, subjects along the ideological spectrum, right? Conservative, centrist, liberal, are capable of heeding the correction and bringing their beliefs in alignment with the facts. That
Good news, everyone.
That is terrific. This means humans can be taught, even certain types of humans. And they can learn, and they can bring their beliefs in alignment with facts. Ultimately, our results suggest that, contrary to most skeptical accounts, citizens possess the prerequisites for democratic competence. God, I really want this to be true. And our election 4 years ago made me really doubt this. When presented with factual information, people heed the facts, even when doing so forces them to separate from their ideological attachments. Of course, their ideology shaped the extent of how receptive they were. Differential learning along partisan lines does not obviate the overall learning we observe. The average subject exposed on the correction subsequently express attitudes more in line with the facts. The capabilities of the people and the requirements of democracies are not as mismatched as many critics would have us believe. Our data leads us to agree. Were the backfire effect to be observed across a population, the implications for democracy would be dire. Facts are meant to matter in a democracy. This is not always the case. Politicians frequently make claims that depart from the truth. What? Let me get this straight. Enhance. Politicians, okay? Politicians, the people we elect that we have the utmost respect and trust in. Politicians frequently, that's a big word for you, Chad, I know, but that means like often. So politicians often make claims that depart from the truth. The truth is out there, the politicians just don't know where it is, right? As do individuals trying to win political arguments. Agreed. I don't always make claims that are 100% truthful, right? Even earlier today, I suggested that Twitch chat is never wrong, okay? Citizens are expected to be able to use facts to hold their leaders and each other accountable. If a politician promised something but fails to achieve it, the fact of that promise may be recalled in the voting booth. God, let's hope, right? Let's hope. If an interlocutor claims something has happened that plainly has not happened, the discrepancy may be pointed out. While consensus on contentious political issues will rarely be achieved, the public debate about such topics is meant to be reason and evidence-based. Factual information constitutes the currency of citizenship. The backfire effect would render this currency close to worthlessness. I mean, first of all, the currency of citizenship is Bitcoin. Okay, we can all agree on that. Bitcoin is mooning when? A citizen who rejects facts, instead opting to strongly adopt her preferred leader's myth-truths, would have difficulty holding her leaders accountable. We might be seeing this play out right now in this great nation. She would be unable to differentiate propaganda from evidence-based information desirable for democratic deliberation. For an individual who rejects the facts, a speaker's ideological polarity is all that matters, not the probity of their claims. Oh my God. Is this what 48% of this nation is? Individuals who reject facts? God, I hope not. The backfire effect is one part of a broader literature that gives us reasons to doubt citizens' democratic competence, as do results of elections. But there's voluminous evidence that the average citizen is misinformed about politics, lacking knowledge about candidates, their policies, and especially factual circumstances that shape policy response. Low levels of political knowledge have persisted for decades. Without a modicum of political knowledge, voters make egregious mistakes. Yep. Such as holding politicians accountable for shark attacks. Oh my God. All right. Let's read more a little bit about their study. Subjects presented with 8 genuine public comments from politicians. In each instance, the politician comments were at odds with available empirical facts. We selected misstatements about issues important to both Republicans and Democrats. And we evenly divided our speakers between the major parties. For each issue, a subject was randomly exposed or not exposed to a correction that cited neutral government data to rebut the speaker. Then all subjects were asked whether or not they agreed with the position that the speaker had articulated, for which the empirical data served as the correction. For example, these remarks by Hillary Clinton. Between 88 and 92 people a day are killed by guns in America. It's the leading cause of death for young black men, the second leading cause for young Hispanic men, the fourth leading cause for young white men. This epidemic of gun violence knows no boundaries, knows no limits of any kind. Okay? Then they were corrected with information that said the number of gun homicides has fallen since the mid 1990s, declining by about 50% between 94 and 2013. And then you're asked to agree or disagree. The number of gun homicides is currently at an all-time high. 3,000 subjects were recruited from Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform. Interesting. Correction effects. Curves are the conditional predictions in their 95% confidence intervals drawn from the regression models described in Table 4. Okay, so now they're plotting both the people that were corrected and uncorrected. And we would expect the shapes of the curves to be different, right? If there was an effect of this corrective attitude to further entrench these individuals, especially those at the end. All right, so let me look at the results from study 1. The average corrected subject increased their agreement with the facts. They don't go against the facts. Okay. No ideological group exposed moved in the opposite direction. That is, no group demonstrated what these people called a backfire effect. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here, right? So down. So moving down is moving against what the politician said, right? So the corrected information here, right? All of these people and the darker curve, right? Left to right is liberal to conservative. So whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative, you moved more into the factual side after being presented with these corrected information. A backfire effect would be if, say for the conservatives, this right-hand branch of this darker segment moved above the lighter branch, right? That is, people after the corrected information got further towards the politician's views and further away from the corrected view. So the fact that none of these are really crossing over in any statistical significant way are used against the backfire effect. All right, so all of these studies, none of them are really crossing over. Where is the WMD response? Yeah, so this is the one that shows the backfire effect from weapons of mass destruction. Backfire appears to be largely a function of question wording, not a characteristic of the general public's relationship to factual information. 8,100 subjects, 36 issues, backfire only in one response, an issue on which Nyhan and Reifler originally observed backfire and coined the backfire effect. Even this instance of backfire disappeared when we simplified the warning. When presented with factual information that corrects politicians, even when that politician is an ally, subjects responded by agreeing with the correction and distancing themselves from the corrected politician. Okay, so I mean, if I were to believe this and I'm working for the Biden campaign, right, I take quotes of what Trump said and then take quotes of, scientists with a great pedigree, with great, with Fauci claims, for instance, right? Saying things that correct misperceptions that Trump has said. Our findings are consistent with one of the most well-documented aspects of mass public opinion. Respondents shy away from cognitive effort, right? If it's hard to fit into your worldview, you're not going to try to fit it into your worldview. So you avoid it. But if there's an equally available, right, and loud voice, okay, presenting you with contrasting information, maybe that having both sources is easier to absorb. The backfire hypothesis proposes that a subject, when furnished facts inconsistent with their commitments, will resolve the challenge of these facts by concocting new considerations to offset the threatening information. Right? So these people that get further entrenched, I guess what they're arguing here is that usually, no, like, if you present me with new information that challenges my worldview, I'm not going to make the cognitive effort to double down and get even more convinced. I'm just going to let it pass through one ear and out the other. Or I might move more towards that corrective action. All right, here's number 3. This one is not peer-reviewed. This is hot off the presses. This is from Northeastern, Harvard, Boston Healthcare, and Harvard. Never heard of these quacks out of Harvard, but I guess we'll believe it. This is from June 2020. So this is June 2020, Searching for the Backfire Effect, Measurement and Design Considerations. All right, so this is TLDR. This is what? These Harvard people, man. Love to write. 21 pages. All right. The abstract is made for Twitch chat. The abstract said, one of the most concerning notions for science communicators, that's us, fact checkers, and advocates of truth is the backfire effect. This is when a correction leads to an individual increasing their belief. Let me try this again. This is when a correction leads to an individual increasing their belief in the very misconception the correction is aiming to rectify. There is currently a debate, so this is 2020, just published or just submitted, not published yet. There is currently a debate as to whether backfire exists at all, as recent studies have failed to find the phenomenon, even under theoretically favorable conditions. In this review, we summarize the current state of the worldview and familiarity backfire effect literatures. We subsequently examine barriers to measuring backfire phenomenon, discuss approaches to improving measurement and design, and conclude with recommendations for fact checkers. We suggest that backfire effects are not a robust empirical phenomenon, and more reliable measures, powerful design, and stronger links could greatly help move the field ahead. Wow. All right, so let me dumb it down for Twitch chat. Okay, not a robust empirical phenomenon. There is not, right, a preponderance of evidence to suggest the backfire effect is real. All right, so this is the original backfire effect. This was challenging it for the first time several years later. Maybe not for the first time, but the one that I found in the literature. And this is a bunch of unreliable Harvard snobs supporting this claim that the backfire effect is largely not legitimate. Moving on, we were looking at this next Harvard study. Are citizens willing to accept journalistic fact checks of misleading claims from candidates they support and to update their attitudes about those candidates? Previous studies have reached conflicting conclusions, about the effects of exposure to counter-attitudinal information. As fact-checking is becoming more prominent, it is therefore worth examining how respondents respond to fact checks of politicians. This is the whole crux of the backfire effect. When somebody fact checks a politician, right, does that fact check do more harm than good? And sometimes, like anecdotally, when I think about like a family member that I try to convince climate change is real, them getting further entrenched, that is much rarer than you would think. Generally, fact checking does, convince a large enough number of people to shift their view a little bit, right? And it's this repetitive information and fact checking that is important. So I fully support the fact checking across, social media and all these groups that are intelligently and factually doing the fact checking. Because this notion of the backfire effect, frankly, is unfounded, it looks like. We test the effects of exposure to realistic journalistic fact checks of claims made by Donald Trump during his convention speech and a general election debate. These messages improved the accuracy of respondents' factual beliefs, even among his supporters, but had no measurable effect on attitudes towards Trump. So these results suggest journalistic fact checks can reduce misperceptions, but often have minimal effects on candidate evaluation or vote choice. Wow. All right, so maybe we slow our roll a little bit, right? It might be true that fact-checking, scientific communication is collectively doing good to reduce misperceptions, right? But it might not shift their political ideology. And maybe that is something that fits with my worldview. That maybe we are making a difference in fact-checking people. Maybe we are making a difference with scientific communication. But whether those people a fact checker is talking to or somebody I'm communicating science with, whether they end up changing their vote and electing people that will listen to science is a whole nother problem. The TLDR of the day is that it is important, right, to battle misinformation with good information, right? And repeating good information is something that I think has been lacking, especially in the world of science and SciComm. I think it's increasing the prevalence of fact-checking, the integrity of the checkers, science, and also presenting the information in accessible ways which aren't framed within the prevalent political polarization. Yeah, I mean, is MSNBC and, CNN and other outlets with definitively liberal slants, right? When they are presenting scientific information, I don't know if that's it's clearly not as legitimate, but I don't know if that's as effective as somebody in purely science communication that's trying to convince people with facts and figures that climate change is real, for example.
Attention, Lord Calvin, your food is at the top of the aquarium, okay?
Thank you.
Hashtag content. That's my fist bumping. That's my dance. That's all you get. That's all any of you will ever get.